Been reading through 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and thinking about this concept of other regard, which maybe we would think of as just loving your neighbor as yourself, but I think there's something here for us, a message for us today in our present situation that really comes through here, looking at this ancient situation. It says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 23, "All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up." What the Apostle Paul is doing is quoting the Corinthians. And some translations get this right and some translations don't. It's an important feature to realize that he's not making the statement, all things are lawful, like I can do whatever the heck I want. That's not what Paul's saying here. What he's saying is that you're saying all things are lawful, and then he says to them in response, but not all things are helpful. And then they're saying all things are lawful, and then he's saying, but not all things edify or build up. And so the point is, even if you would be able to do something, doesn't mean that you should. Verse 24, "Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner and you are disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you, without raising any question on the ground of conscience. But if someone says to you, 'This has been offered in sacrifice,' then do not eat it, for the sake of the one who informed you, and for the sake of conscience. I do not mean your conscience, but his. For why should my liberty be determined by someone else's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of that for which I gave thanks?" Here he's talking about food that had been sacrificed to idols. Now it's clear that for Christians, then as now, it is absolutely inappropriate for us to attend the sacrificing of animals to other gods. It's just not an appropriate context for the people of God to be in. However, if that food derived from that animal that was dedicated to that god, the next day showed up in the supermarket, or in their case, just the agora, the outdoor market, is that food by itself contaminated because it was killed in honor to that god? What Paul's saying here is no, go ahead and eat the food, whatever. It doesn't matter. The food's not contaminated, but you wouldn't want to participate in the sacrifice itself. Now he says this, that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Look, God made all these animals. This is all sanctified to God to start with. But that understanding is not in everyone's mind. There are some who, because of their familiarity with idols and having eaten food sacrificed to idols in the past, done it in a religious manner, that they would be completely compromised if they did find out that you were eating meat that had been sacrificed to idols. And so what Paul says to them is, look, if somebody informs you, first of all, if nobody says anything, just eat it. It's no big deal. But if somebody informs you, then don't eat it. And he goes on in verse 31 to say, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved. Be imitators of me as I am of Christ." And so what Paul says is, in the end, look, what matters is that you're honoring God and that you're not giving offense to people by your liberty, by your freedom. Now, in our present situation, there are certain restrictions placed upon us, and there are certain cultural norms that we're being expected to uphold in this time. For example, sanitizing the hands before going out to somewhere or after getting in from somewhere. A lot of us are also being asked to wear masks, whether a cloth mask, a bandana, or a proper medical mask, whatever you have access to. When you go to the grocery store, for example, or in other situations where you can't be far away from people, more than 6 feet away from people. Now look, if somebody is an unbeliever, if somebody has no hope of Christ, do you think they would be scared? Yeah, you better believe that they're scared. What Paul says here is, give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of the many, that they may be saved. I think we have a real opportunity here to express other regard, to be able to show love to those who do not yet have hope in our Lord. And that the goal of doing that would be so that we could eventually speak and that others may be saved and that God may be glorified. But in the meantime, showing consideration, even if that means wearing a stupid mask for a little while when you're in a public setting where you're around a lot of people, or doing some of these other things that we're being asked to do, that this is, in this case, really the loving thing to do for our neighbor. And in the end, Jesus tells us to love our neighbor as ourselves. And this is something that we can do to show that love to them, rather than to express our soul liberty here and say, look, I have faith, I can move mountains and nothing can come near me and God will strike down the pestilence. And yeah, maybe all that's true in this situation. I can't speak for that. If you have a word from God, God bless you. But if we want to be considerate to others, then we want to seek to show other regard. And I think that's an important lesson for us today to learn here from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. So I encourage you, read this chapter on your own and see what you think.